I was born in this house. I didn't know very much about that. In fact, the first thing I remember down here was when I was about 5, standing just down here, doing nobody any harm, and a woman came down the road. She stopped me and she said, "What's your name?" "Noel Calvin." She then asked me, was I the son of the minister, the Reverend Calvin of Tennant Street? And I said I was. She was carrying a shopping bag, and she put her hand in her shopping bag, and I thought, innocent-like, that I was going to get a sweet for the information I'd passed on. She took her hand out, and in it was an egg. This was marvelous. An egg, a whole egg. I got the egg all right. Wham! I got that egg right in the middle of my face. And she said something about being a home ruler. I had no idea what she was talking about. All I know is that I had become a political martyr at the age of 5. You see, my father was a fairly prominent home ruler. I don't suppose that woman had any more idea, or much more idea, than I had as to what home rule was all about. Anyway, that egg made quite an impression. It brought home to me the difficulty and maybe the danger of being the odd man out in your community. This is one thing the community doesn't seem to tolerate. What everyone else is thinking, and any deviation, you watch out. And every day for the next few years, I did this walk from Woodvale Avenue to Forth River School. School was all right, though I never had the feeling that we really belonged there. Always in the background, you see, was this home rule business. We were the sons of a home rule family. And this always meant being deviationists, not quite in line with what the rest of the community was doing and believing and wanting. Well, I stayed at that school for a few years. The end came rather unexpectedly, sooner than we'd thought. It happened like this. We'd been reading, and I came across the word for the first time, gizzard. It seemed a good, strong, succulent word, and I turned around and said to a chap behind, "Look, I'll slit your gizzard." Up went his hand. "Please, Miss, Noel Calvin says he'll slit my gizzard." "Did you say that, Noel Calvin?" And I hadn't learned to tell a lie without blushing, and I said yes. So I was sent to the headmistress to be caned. When I got to her room, there was pandemonium. She was hauling a kid who was hanging onto his desk. She was hauling him across the floor and whaling into him with a cane. And this was quite exciting until I realized it was my young brother. This was more than flesh and blood could stand, and before I knew quite what had happened, I jumped on the headmistress's back. She soon shrugged me off, took me by the shoulder, led me to the front door of the school, and dramatically flung her arm in the direction of our house and said,
"Noel Calvin, go home. Go home and break your mother's heart."
It wasn't long after that egg incident, probably when I was about 6, that we moved from Woodvale Avenue to a new house in Woodvale Road. At home in the manse, especially in the earlier days in Belfast, life was pretty real and earnest. As youngsters, we were never allowed to do the things that some of the other youngsters we played with did. We were never allowed to go to the pictures, go to theaters. These were the devices of the devil. And the further we stayed away from them, the better. In our house, there was no smoking, there was no drinking. Everything was under some kind of regulation. There were rules, there were laws that had to be attended to. Sunday was a very special day. The regulations were even tighter on Sunday than they were during the week. We could only find life bearable by cheating. We did things behind our parents' back. We sneaked in papers and books we weren't supposed to have, not even on the weekday. And one way and another, through getting around the rules and regulations, we had on a Sunday quite a lot of fun. In the manse there was a bullet hole in one of the bedroom windows, a reminder of the turbulent society we were living in. The windows of the church had to be boarded up wired up, because they were continually being broken. One of the things that troubled me, confused me the whole time, was that although we were a family of Protestants, we were treated as though we were Roman Catholics because of this home rule business. And it may have been that gave me some understanding of the position of the Roman Catholics, some appreciation of the plight they were in. It somehow engendered a feeling of understanding towards those who were at the receiving end of that same intolerance. I can remember at home in the dark when Father didn't turn up at night. It happened a number of times that he was beaten up on the way around visiting his people, doing his ordinary good works. Nothing quite so blind as hatred, especially when that hatred is the development or degeneration of a prejudice. You see, in this dreadful tension between the extremists of the Protestants and Roman Catholics, the element that was totally missing was the element of humility. Neither side was prepared to consider, even as a remote possibility, that the other side might have an element of truth about it. Well, there was the position. Both sides dug in their heels. Each took the line that it was absolutely right. In this sad, ridiculous situation, you see, the thing that was missing was the Christian virtue of humility. We never got within speaking distance of charity. Or to put it in simpler terms, both sides were damn bad sports.
All you present know something of the movement that has been on foot during my absence. The object of it is to starve me out of the neighborhood. I'm not going to be starved out. All the tyranny that can be devised, all the picketing that can be organized, all the threatening letters that I've received or might receive, will not alter my convictions one iota, nor prevent me from expressing them in the clearest manner. If any man or woman cannot come to my church without being browbeaten and intimidated in the public street, and children come to the Sunday school without being intimidated, then in interests of truth and justice, I am prepared to take steps that there should be liberty in this city. The great sin of sins with which I stand charged is that in some way or other I am in secret sympathy with Rome. I, in sympathy with Rome, whose ancestors lived and fought through the French Revolution in the darkest days of Scottish history. This is one of the blackest lies that could be forged in hell, and it's entirely worthy of its authors.
Father, quite sure, was Christian enough to accept Roman Catholics as fellow Christians, whatever he felt about some of the doctrines that they were identified with. He would accept them as human beings, kith and kin with himself, albeit with some important variations in belief and maybe of behavior. He got rid of his pugnacity, not like so many of his fellow Protestants did in taking it out of the Romans. He got rid of his pugnacity in challenging and trying to do something about the violence which the Romans received in word, in thought, and in deed at the hands of Father's fellow Protestants. Anyone born and brought up in Belfast knows all about the slogans that forever appear on every gable end. No Pope here. To hell with the Pope. No surrender. Remember 1690. And of course, as kids, we enjoyed, though we didn't understand, all the fuss and excitement that happened on the 12th of July, the bonfires and the orange processions, the beating of drums. We enjoyed that. There was a colour and excitement, there was drama in it all. And I suppose, as kids, we shouted with the rest. That was long ago. And while it's obvious that from time to time the trouble breaks out again, there are merciful signs that a generation is coming along which regards all this as a load of irrelevant rubbish. The expulsion from Forth River National School wasn't as disastrous as it might have been, because although I wasn't aware of it at the time, it had already been arranged that I should transfer to another school in the centre of Belfast. INST was the name, I-N-S-T. To give it its full title, the Royal Belfast Academical Institution. Everybody knows it as INST. This meant a walk into the centre of Belfast every day, 2 miles. When it was very wet, we might be allowed to go down on a tram, but normally it was a walk, there and back. Well, this turning to the ministry seemed to be one way of proving to Father that maybe I was following in his own steps. He himself, of course, had been a minister. After doing a good deal of thinking and talking about it, we decided that I would attempt an arts degree at Queen's, and from there proceed to do my theology at Peyton College, Nottingham, and that was just the way it turned out. At the university, the sense of freedom and independence which had been engendered at Inst was deepened and strengthened through coming into contact with a whole new variety of fellows and girls and ideas. You see, there was no good digging in your heels and saying, in effect, I'm going to stay the way I am. You either had to learn to appreciate and be interested in the things that were going to cause a modification of your life, or else be an old stay-putter. So one night I came down to the Liverpool steamer to set out for Nottingham. Came down with no great sense of adventure. There was certainly no moaning at the bar, as I put out to sea, not the bar that Tennyson was thinking of anyway. It was never intended, it was never in my mind that I was making a permanent break with Ulster and Belfast. I only intended to go over to England to clear off my theology for 3 years and then in all probability return. So to England I went, where I had no particular interests, the English for whom I had no particular affection, among the English whom, if report were true, lived a rather duller life than we did, and whose sense of humor was almost missing. One of the unforeseen results of this new and more liberal approach to the understanding of the Christian religion which I'd come to in Nottingham was that for the first time I began to consider the possibility of remaining in England. There was an atmosphere of freedom in the churches in England which I found to my liking. I suddenly ran into a brand new church in a developing suburb of Hall Green in Birmingham, and there I stayed for 4 years. We continued until we hit the one snag in the situation. They were paying me £5 a week. Now I knew that that would keep one of us, but it couldn't keep 2 of us, and one day I met a woman. Before we knew what had happened, we'd become engaged, and we were planning a wedding. Well, we were married in Birmingham in 1934, and we finished up our honeymoon in Burnley, Salem Church, Burnley. Well, I'll see you in Swindon one of these days.
Yeah, I hope so, no.
Right.
We'll see you in on then.
All the best. After about 10 years in Burnley, a chance came to move from an industrial community to an essentially agricultural community. And so to Trowbridge I came in 1943, never dreaming that I'd be here for a quarter of a century. About 3 years ago, at a time when I was concerned about the involvement of the local churches in the life of the local community, I agreed to let my name go forward as a candidate in the local council elections. My family said to me kindly, "Oh, you'll get in all right, Dad, because everybody knows you." Life in this lively little country town hasn't, of course, anything of the same sharp antagonisms that were such a marked feature of life in the place where I was born. Here we get on very happily, pleasantly, placidly together, mixing up with one another, everything almost one large happy family. But the tensions are there. See, if by toleration you mean really open-ended conversation, a genuine open-ended fellowship in which we accept and appreciate each other's differences of culture, creed, class, color. If that's what you mean by toleration, then even in Trowbridge we still have quite a long way to go. And we've quite a long way to go all round, on all sides. This is no question of one section of the community being at odds with another section of the community and demanding that they should fit in. There was an instance not very long ago when I was talking with a group of people about a certain little problem. Now, nobody knew who was at the heart of this problem until somebody threw in the question, "I suppose this could be one of our colored friends." Now, this was said in a way that sounded kindly. In fact, it was, in its assumption, quite sinister and cruel. See what I mean? Underneath our outward placidity, our decent respectability, our vaunted kindliness, there still are tensions. There is still the possibility and reality of intolerance.
Gentlemen, please. Mr. President, gentlemen, welcome to the 32nd meeting of the Wingfield branch of the Society for the Preservation of Beers from the Woods. And now I think we'll ask the Secretary, if he will, to read the minutes of the last meeting, please.
I've never wanted to wear a clerical collar or dress, appear or behave as ministers are normally, traditionally expected to appear and behave. Simply was that the clerical collar, in my experience, stands for a whole lot of things that I have no use for at all.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To start talking about my...
Since being in Trowbridge, I've had an extension of my local ministry in several directions. One of them has been through being involved in the affairs and administrations of the denomination. And yet, it seemed to me that most of our interests and most of our activities were being directed to securing the survival of the church rather than the more exciting and exacting affairs of the kingdom. I've never been able to accept that the church finally mattered in our endeavors to make certain of the immediate survival of the church. Our activity has seemed to amount to very little more than pushing the damned furniture around. You see, we're all talking as though we had a virtual monopoly of the Holy Spirit. And in fact, the more enlightened newspapers seem to some of us to be following more Christ-like policies than the official policies of the church which carries the name of Jesus Christ. And now we do this unusual thing. We constitute ourselves on a Sunday morning into a special meeting of this Tabernacle Church. All church meetings in a congregational church are important. This particular meeting is particularly significant. You know a bit of the background. 2 months ago or thereabouts, we agreed in principle that the time had come for us to unite with our Methodist friends across the road. In principle, we set up straight away a joint committee to think out a possible structure, shape, constitution for a united church. And after several meetings, we have produced what we call draft suggestions. I am the last person in the world to settle down in tandem with anybody, especially another man. It's all very well, you see. All my life I've been on my own, independent, and this takes its toll. This shapes something.
There are one or two points where I think it wants altering. Well, paragraph 1 makes it clear that the church meeting can discuss issues referred from the church council and make decisions thereon. But it makes no provision for the raising of issues by the church meeting itself.
This, I think, is one of the points that I had in mind earlier on when I said, how far are you going to leave this in principle and in general, and how far are you going to try to cover every eventuality? I think once you start that, trying to particularize what may or may not be done at the meeting, we could be here until the cows come home and the list would be as long as your arm and back again. I raised this point with Mr. Hearn, and we'll raise it again, because we'll see that these matters are brought to the drafting committee, to their notice. No, I mean, it's not as easy as falling out of bed, just two churches coming together. It's fraught with difficulty, and it's going to cause for all the grace of good human nature, and a great deal of understanding, and great adventures in friendship. Oh, thank God it can be done. I think it's awfully important that we get rid of all our anxieties and doubts and concerns before we finally commit ourselves, so that having committed ourselves, there's no looking back and being unfit for the kingdom of God. We've got to make up our minds. whether we're going to stay the way we've always been, or whether we can make some decent compromise. The thing that I have to keep saying to myself sometimes, and I think you'll appreciate this too, that I make this personal. I, on my side, am not going to become less than a Congregationalist in this merger. I'm going to become more than a Congregationalist. And the Methodist isn't going to become less than a Methodist, but he's going to become more than a Methodist. That there is addition and appreciation here, which is, I think, going to justify such renunciations as we have to make. There's no way between you and me and the gate. This is one of the things that irritates me with the Anglicans. They talk plenty about unity, but so Christopher Driver says, better hide behind somebody, Christopher Driver says that the Anglicans, for all their talk about unity, have yet to make the first significant sacrificial gesture. Now, there's no way forward without significant sacrificial gestures. And the kind of renunciations that I've had to make in agreeing to this document are simply minimal freedoms that I'm quite prepared to sacrifice in the interest of something that's far more valuable and far more exciting. Perhaps by October, even the beginning of October, we will have a great celebration service to mark the start. Let's sing a hymn and go home. The closing hymn is number 259. Number 259, Lord of the worlds above, how pleasant and how fair the dwellings of thy love, thine earthly temples are. Maybe it was because, as a youngster, I was the victim of intolerance, that I've been left with an almost neurotic concern for anybody who's under attack, anybody who's at the receiving end of human bigotry and prejudice. After all, we can't get rid of the odd man in society. We've got to live together, all of us, whatever our creed, class, culture, or color. Besides, who in his senses would want to get rid of all the varieties that we have amongst us? Who would want a society where everybody thinks, feels, behaves, believes the same? The very variety that creates the problem also and incidentally provides the opportunity of creating a richly colorful society. Now, when you see this, and when you accept it with your mind, and with even a trace of adventurous goodwill in your heart, no one not one of you is likely to get, as I did when a child of 5, an egg in your face.